Thank you all for showing up today. My name is Scott Gifford. I'm the owner of Classic Wing Zero Services. We are the operator here at the Hood River Airport. We provide scenic flights, flight instruction, aircraft rental, we sell fuel. Anything you want to do with flying, we can help you. Just out of curiosity, how many, I recognize some faces here. How many pilots do we have? Okay. How many are from, not from around here? Okay. Are you a regular flying in or looking to fly in? Or?
We were down the event in Portland for our grandson and just came over to look sightseeing.
Cool. Okay. Where are you from?
Woodinville, Washington.
Okay. Well, thanks for coming out. Anyway, out of curiosity's sake, when you hear Hood River mentioned, what is the first thing you think of, besides WAAM, of course? What's the first thing you think of?
Wind.
Wind. Exactly.
Rickus, how are you doing?
You think of wind, and you think of windsurfing, and the fact that Hood River is the #1 location in the world for windsurfing, kiteboarding. Why do we have an airport in such a windy area? Well, quite frankly, the airport was here before the windsurfers, and actually, it's not that bad here as far as wind. Here we have a nice map of the Pacific Northwest, and you can see how Washington and Oregon, you have a nice wall right down here that divides the two states into two different climate areas. On the west side of the Cascade Range, it is a wet maritime air mass. On the east side, it is a drier continental air mass. And the Cascade Mountains, acting as a wall, try to keep those two air masses separate. Except in one location, you have the Columbia River that cuts a sea level gap through the mountains. Troutdale, Crown Point, that's where you're going to see the very high winds. In fact, Crown Point, it's really not unusual to see wind gusts peaking at 100 miles an hour. Troutdale being right there at the exit point, right here, also seeing high winds. In the wintertime, you have the cold air mass from the east side flowing in. It drives under the warmer air mass, the wet maritime air mass. That's why Portland will have the freezing rain, the real bad ice storms, the snow. Yet you go slightly north or slightly south, and they have rain. In the summertime, the flow reverses. The velocities will not be as high, but in the summertime, the flow is easterly. Mix it with the westerly flow of the Columbia River, and the friction between the air mass and the water now creates whitecaps, choppy water, a playground for the windsurfers and kiteboarders. Now, for you pilots here in the Pacific Northwest, this is actually where you folks are spoiled rotten. Most of the airports up here, the runways are lined up with the wind. Where I learned to fly down to the Southwest, it seemed like every time an airport was built, the designers and builders went to the National Weather Service and asked for a weather report, a whole study. And so the weather National Weather Service would give them a report, probably about that thick, of all of the average winds, breaking it down into the different seasons. They could divide it by the month, by the day, what the high temperatures are, the low temperatures, all this information. And to me, it was very obvious that the builders looked at the report and went, wow, this is great. The wintertime, winds are 90% out of this direction. Summertime, winds are 15% of the time are out of this direction. Oh, this is such great information. We're building a runway here. So you always had serious crosswinds, almost 90 degrees at times. And if they built multiple runways, they never got it right anyway. So if we take a look, you pilots will recognize this, our crosswind component chart. Looking at this chart, if the angular difference between the wind and the runway is 0, obviously we have no crosswind. That makes it very nice and easy for us. If we had a 90-degree crosswind, like where I was from, a 15-mile-an-hour wind, you have a 15-mile-an-hour crosswind. But if the wind isn't either there, somewhere in between, then it varies slightly. Say, for instance, like what we have here in Hood River typically, it's about a 30-degree crosswind. So we find our 30-degree line here, come down here to 15, and we take a look, and right here, we will have looks like about a 13-mile-an-hour headwind, but our crosswind, come down here, is only about a 7-mile-an-hour crosswind, which is very, I'm not going to say easy, but it is definitely well within the design parameters of most of the airplanes we fly. Whereas a 15-mile-an-hour direct crosswind, now you're starting to push the limits of the airplane and push the limits of the pilot. So let's take a look at Hood River Airport specifically. Now, we take a look in here at this photograph, and see our runway here, runway 725. Now remember what I said about the gorge flow, how if you go to the side, the velocity starts to rapidly decrease. If the winds are about 30 miles an hour down on the river, here at Hood River, by the time you get to the airport, we're less than 3 miles from the river, our wind speed is probably dropped in half. So that means we, say for instance, if we have a 15-mile-an-hour crosswind, it is primarily coming out of this direction. So about a 30-degree. So there we have our 7-mile-an-hour direct crosswind. Now some people are very scared about flying out of here because they think about the winds and, oh my God, Hood River, #1 place in the world for windsurfing. But they don't think of the winds as far as the velocity decreasing. Some of the other factors here at the airport, they start to get very nervous about. One of the things that very poor layout, certain aspects of the airport, it was very obvious that when the FAA decided to place certain things here, such as the primary windsock, which tells pilots which direction the wind is blowing, and the automated weather recording station, the FAA said, this is where you're putting these. Yet they didn't look at the prevailing winds, which are out of the northwest, coming out of this direction. Both the automated weather and the windsock are immediately downwind of very tall trees, which means The windsock and the weather report are not going to be anywhere near accurate. So here we come to have a situation where pilots are trying to depend on two pieces of information that's wrong. Which is why we have a secondary windsock down over here just off the runway, another secondary windsock here, and thanks to WAAM, the best windsock probably is the huge American flag right out here that you can see from about 3 miles away. Plus, also thanks to the orchards, we also have lots of times we'll have little smoke columns coming out from them burning slash piles and such, so that also helps us. But I think another thing that is a problem with pilots is, and as a flight instructor, I will take a little bit of blame for this. In our flight training, we emphasize using the end of the runway, using the numbers as our aim spot. That's where we want to aim to land. Well, unfortunately here at Hood River, again, we got the wind from the northwest. Not only is the windsock at the reporting station immediately downwind of the trees, but also right here at the end of the runway, where as an instructor, we're focusing our students' attention. All of that turbulent air coming off the trees, the student is trying to land. And so as instructors, we need to teach better, and we also need to point out to students and other pilots, we've got a 3,000-foot runway. Most of our airplanes don't need anywhere near that. So don't try to land right here in the turbulence. Go past the turbulence. Land in the air that's a little bit smoother. Another thing that we have a problem with is on the east side of the airport, just off the end of the runway, we have the Hood River. And so that's a nice little trench off the end of the runway that the air will momentarily drop into, bounce out, lots of turbulence right there on final where we're nice low to the ground. So we get the turbulence, we get the descending air, the sinkers off the end of the runway, which will scare the bejesus out of a lot of the pilots. So again, aiming a little further down the runway, we'll come in higher and we'll be above a lot of things. The other thing that the transient pilot is not aware of is the fact that the runway is not flat. Thanks to the Hood River Valley, we have Mount Defiant, some of the foothills, comes down. Here we have the Hood River Valley, the Hood River, and then it comes back up to the hills off to the east. So the runway is right here, definitely sloped to where your visual cues for landing will be off. To where landing on 2.5, people will try to come in low, which lets them back into the dirty air, the turbulence, the sinkers, and they get into trouble. The other fun thing about all this wind is with the wind coming up and over the mountains to the west of us, we get the turbulence off of there. So taking off, if you extend a little too far to the west, climbing out, you're going to get into the down air, you're going to get into the turbulence, you're going to get bounced around. So, all these weather factors that flying in and out of this airport, flying in and out of every airport, you need to really think about and be aware. Of course, some of the good things about this airport is the winds. Because, okay, the bad side's here. The good side is over here. Because that wind will now hit this hill and be deflected up. Which is why Hood River is actually a very good place to fly gliders. Power pilots, you can use this rising air too. Use it to your advantage. Get to cruise altitude faster. In the summertime, get to the cooler air faster. Make it much more enjoyable. One of the other, talking about gliders, one of the things we have to worry about here at Hood River is the fact that the traffic pattern is set up. If you look at the aeronautical charts for Hood River, you'll see RP asterisk. Now that asterisk is very hard to see. I'll admit that. RP means that one or more of the runways have a right-hand pattern. The asterisk on the chart means there is a special situation at this airport. You need to look it up. What we have done here at Hood River is gliders and ultralights fly a right-hand pattern for both runways. Powered aircraft can fly left-hand pattern. Judy, you've been here longest. What was the thinking on that as far as why right-hand pattern for gliders and ultralights?
Gliders, basically, we like to be head-to-head our enemy.
Okay.
Okay? So basically, gliders stay opposite. So if you're coming down and on the glider, you're looking over, you're seeing who's on left down. And base, there's no, you've got them eyeball to eyeball. Gliders can cut in and take the taxiway.
Because they've also got the right-of-way.
Right.
But,
So it was basically, felt like, gliders want you like to face your enemy. Otherwise, you're descending. A glider will never be at a pattern altitude. Power plane's going to be at a pattern altitude, 1,000 feet, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Glider is almost descending. Glider's not going to be at 1,000 feet.
Okay.
It's coming in, and it's descending through that traffic pattern all the time.
okay.
So we found years ago it was better to have gliders opposite whatever the power traffic was doing. And then we were eyeball to eyeball. We're facing our enemy, both of us are.
Okay.
Because we really kind of are. Because nobody wants to get in trouble. Nobody wants to run into anybody else.
Okay. So,
That was what it was 35 years ago.
35 years ago. So, okay. The system works as long as everyone is aware of it and everyone flies the way they should. Okay, now that pretty much deals with flying here at Hood River. I also threw in some stuff here because not knowing how many people were going to be here wanting to be pilots. So some of the eligibility requirements for learning to fly. To be a student pilot, must be at least 16 years of age, except for gliders and balloons. And parents, this will scare the bejesus out of you. Your son or daughter can legally fly a glider by themselves at the age of 14. Must be able to read, write, speak, and understand the English language. And then to get your private license, must be at least 17 years of age, 16 years old for gliders and balloons. need to be able to read, write, speak, and understand the English language. You will have to receive instruction from an authorized instructor and have to pass a written exam, an oral exam, and a practical exam. You only need to have 40 hours of flying time to get your license. This is for a private license. Out of that 40 hours, at least 20 of it must be flight instruction, 3 hours of cross-country training, 3 hours at night. One of those night flights must be a cross-country flight more than 100 nautical miles. At night, you must also do 10 takeoffs and landings to a full stop. At an airport, I love that comment, like you're going to do 3 takeoffs and landings somewhere other than an airport.
Carrier.
Well, technically, carrier is also an airport, just a moving one. You have to do 3 hours of training in preparation for your flight test. Your 10 hours of solo flight, 5 hours must be on cross-country flying. One of your solo cross-country flights must be at least 150 nautical miles. And you have to have taken off and landed at an airport with an operating control tower, dealing with controllers. So that is the requirements for a private license. Now, the FAA says 40 hours minimum. Right now, the national average, last I heard, is about 65 hours to get your license. But that's a lot of people that are taking a lesson once a month, once every other month. And you spend so much of the next lesson getting back to where you were at the end of the previous lesson. I try to recommend that if you're going to learn to fly, try to set time aside more like about once a week if you can afford it, or more is better. It'll actually save you money in the long run. We've actually had people, highly motivated people, some people, their job depended on getting their pilot's license. We had one gentleman who lives in Hawaii where it's insanely expensive to learn to fly. But he has family here in Hood River. So he took a month off from work, came over here, stayed with family, and flew every day. Or was out here at the airport every day. His first lesson was on July 7th. He soloed on the 17th. His return ticket back home was the 30th. He took his check ride on the 28th. It can be done. But being able to fly more regularly will definitely help you along. Yes, sir.
Are gliders still exempt from the medical?
As of this time, gliders and hot air balloons, you self-certify. If you have no known medical conditions, technically that would prevent you from getting a medical. You can still fly. You do not have to have a medical. A light sport aircraft, to fly as a light sport pilot, you also self-certify. Again, if you have no known medical conditions that would prevent you from getting a medical, you can fly a light sport. It's slowly moving through Congress that for certain private pilots, you will be able to, sometime in the future, self-certify if you have had a medical, last I've read, if you have had a medical that has not been revoked or denied, if you've had a medical in the past 10 years, you can self-certify. But I have to emphasize, all of these pilot certificates, if you have a condition that would prevent getting a medical, technically, you're not supposed to fly.
My understanding on that too, Scott, is that if somebody's never had a medical, before they can self-certify, they do have to get one. But I'm not certain of that.
That's a question. That part of the bill is rolling through Congress. Who knows what it's going to say by the time it actually comes through, by the time everything gets all
It's
said
that's
and done.
the Senate now,
Yeah.
and it's with the House.
So that's my understanding is you have to at least have pass a medical, and then every year have to go see your regular physician and basically get the okay from him that yes, we can fly. But it'll be curious to see what actually happens.
So you think this year?
I thought last.
Okay. Like the old saying goes, pro is the opposite of con. So what's the opposite of progress? Congress. Just depending on what they do, we don't know. So it's a wait and see. Anyone else have any questions? Thank you for coming.
Got one. I didn't.
Oh, okay.
I thought we were talking about this stuff.
Okay.
Suppose I come down here next summer and I get up at 8 o'clock in the morning and take a passenger, want to go fly up around Mount Hood.
Okay.
Let's take a little tour around there.
Sure.
What should I think about as far as the winds up there, and is there a better way of doing it and not a better way of doing it?
As far as a better way of doing it, as far as going around Mount Hood, one thing you really have to pay attention about, winds aloft. Because especially once you start getting up, trying to go around the actual summit of Mount Hood, you're now definitely getting into the altitudes where the wind speeds are going to be a lot higher.
You see lenticular
Yeah.
clouds.
25 knot plus. Then you know that anywhere downwind, immediately downwind of the mountain, it's going to be turbulent. Lenticulars are a very good indication of even higher winds, and if you have lenticulars standing over Mount Hood, I would take a look and see which direction the wind is from, and then only stay on that upwind side of the mountain.
Last week, you could see above the haze every mountaintop in the Cascades, every one.
Yeah. The other thing you definitely need to take a look at is check your temporary flight restrictions, because there have been times where if there is some type of a rescue operation going on, somebody's fallen off the mountain and the National Guard's trying to airlift them out, or if there is someone lost and they're doing a search and rescue, a lot of times they will throw a TFR around the mountain. So those are the main things I would look at.
Well, going around those, the winds are predominantly out of the west. Better to go around with what you kind of like counterclockwise thing, so you kind of got the left.
Well, it's kind of one of those things.
Facing down.
One of the things I would do is, dependent on the airplane, take off out of here. Like you said, the winds are predominantly out of the west. So I would take off from here and immediately head east. Go get over the hills just east of here. Utilize that free lift to get to altitude and start heading up the valley. And then once I get to like Parkdale, then I would start veering more towards the west, because now you're not directly downwind of Mount Defiance, and you should be at a little bit higher altitude where you're not getting the real turbulent air coming off of Mount Defiance. And so you kind of zigzag around the rough area and then go from there. And especially with you sitting in the left seat and your passenger sitting in the right seat, that might give you a chance to go a little bit more towards Portland, get some more altitude, and then swing around and start to do a clockwise turn around Mount Hood on the upwind side, putting the mountain on the same side as your passenger.
So a loop around the east side of the mountain, west side of the mountain is probably better than trying to do a complete
Yeah.
circle.
Unless you're flying an airplane that's got lots of horsepower, like what we use for the 182s, you know, we can get to altitude quicker, we get out of the turbulence, but we still have to worry about if we are immediately downwind of the mountain. It can be a rough ride if you're real close. If I'm going to do a loop, a complete loop around the mountain, then on the downwind side, I'll give the mountain a real wide berth. Kind of give them a, real nice big view of everything. But then when we get, where we're not immediately downwind, then yes, then I can get up closer to the mountain and really get the in-your-face grandeur of the mountain. Yes.
There's a military training route that comes down the White Salmon River and then heads east over the Columbia, and sometimes they break off and they'll head further south. Are the times of those runs published anywhere, or you're just keeping your eyes and ears open?
Keep your eyes and ears open. I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, the route you are talking about is primarily a low-level training route.
Yeah, my house is at 1,200 feet, and sometimes I'm looking down on them.
Yes.
It
Yes.
depends on how many digits they have in the training route number, too, to tell whether they're going to have any routing below 1,500 feet or not.
They're always below 1,500.
Most of the time they're out here doing
Yeah.
out of
That
Whidbey Island.
that particular route you're talking about, it's low level, and they're moving.
Sometimes it's fighters, sometimes it's cargo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if it's a fighter, rarely are they by themselves.
Right.
Exactly.
Out there. If you see one, be looking.
There was actually one time when I was going to school in southern Arizona, I was driving back home, and there was a military training route plus a restricted area just immediately west of me. And I drive along in my car, fat, dumb, and happy, and the highway kind of did this little number over the hills. And I'm just traveling along fat, dumb, and happy, and all of a sudden I saw a F-4 Phantom right across in front of me. He was in the valley. Well, you really wouldn't call it a valley per se. I mean, the depression. He was windshield level in front of me. And all I could think of was, holy, where is the wingman? Because yes, fighters always travel in pairs. I had the momentary thought of, where's the wingman? And at that point, the wingman went right smack over the top of me. I have no idea how high he was, because it was ear-splitting, and I looked this way, and all I could see was the two exhausts as he's going back. So sometimes low-level routes can be fun to observe, but as a pilot flying, it can be scary. You might get lucky like what happened to me one time, and you see them a long ways away, if you're lucky and it's an older aircraft that produces a little bit of a smoke trail. I had the pleasure of watching a B-52 come at me, and fortunately they smoke. And I picked him up about 30 seconds before he went past me. But that was at least enough heads up where, oh, okay, good. I could see a void. The current stuff, the F-18s, we'll never see. Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much. For those of you who are local, I would like to point out that they are in the process. There is a Experimental Aircraft Association chapter here in the Hood River Valley. Meets the first Monday of every month, alternating between Classic Wings Aero Services, the FBO here at the airport, and at the Dells. For you glider pilots or wannabe glider pilots, there is a glider club being formed right now, Hood River Soaring here in Hood River. If you're interested, come talk to me. Thank you very much.